Jesus is the reason that each of us are here right now. Jesus is the reason that each of us are here right now. Jesus searched and found us, each of us as lost sheep, and he brought us home. And as we encounter Jesus, he speaks to the deepest longings in our hearts. And he invites us to himself, and he invites us to follow him. And as we come in, as we receive him, our lives are forever changed. Jesus doesn't, however, leave us to navigate life alone, because we can't do it alone. We need one another. Jesus doesn't leave us to do this alone. He gathers all of his people together. Jesus gathers us. Matthew chapter 16, you may remember a few months ago when we went through this. Jesus says, I will build my church. See, Jesus gathers, and he gathers us into a people. The church, the gathering of his people, is Jesus' idea. He's the one that gathers us. In fact, this word church comes from this Greek word ekklesia, which literally means the called out ones, the gathered ones. Jesus calls us out of the world, gathers us together. So the church in its essence is people. Church is not an institution or an organization. I mean, we have some supporting structures to come behind what we do, but at the core and at the essence, the church is people. And Jesus gathers his people for a purpose. Because what he has for us is so good and so big that it requires us to do it together. The kingdom work, the kingdom mission of Jesus is so good. We need each other. We need all the different gifts represented in the room, and we need to do it together. Now, every church has the same basic mission. Rooted and grounded in the story of Jesus and his message of the kingdom of God, we're sent on a mission to make disciples and to produce mature disciples of Jesus at that. So we are here to build people up. That's what we do as a church. We are here to build people up who are mature in Christ, who can be the hands and feet of Jesus in our neighborhoods, who can speak Jesus and do the kingdom works of Jesus to heal, to reconcile, to show mercy, to seek justice, to mend broken hearts, to release those in bondage, to invite into the presence of God where there is love and there is peace, much like we experienced this morning in worship. Jesus gathers every church with the same basic mission. Yet at the same time, every church has its unique way of fulfilling that purpose. Because different people have a different mix of gifts and abilities, of strengths and of weaknesses, of values and of visions that God's put in our heart. So when Jesus gathers different people together, we see that each church has its own unique flavor, and dare I even say its own unique calling. So then now looking specifically at this church at Harvest Vineyard, the question then becomes, with the mix of people that Jesus has gathered here and seems to have called together, who has God made us to be? And how will we uniquely walk out our purpose in Jesus? Well, last June, we had a meeting with our Harvest Elders team and a selection of a few other folks who represent harvesters. And these meetings were designed to listen to the Lord, to listen to one another, with the purpose to co-discern and to co-create vision for harvest for the coming year. And the vision we co-discerned was useful in enabling us to say yes to the invitation of God to the journey he has called us on. Now, our desire in that is to deepen this sense of belonging and ownership and engagement for the journey that God is inviting us as harvesters. Because we want to journey together, because there's nothing else on earth like a church where everyone gets to play their part. Nothing like it on earth. Now, we discerned this vision by asking a number of key and pointed questions. We asked some questions looking back into who we were, looking back into our past, just seeing who God made us to be, finding our history and our commonalities, then looking in the present, discerning his presence right now. Like, where do we see God's fingerprints in terms of what he's doing right now? And then we looked into the future. What is God inviting us to reach towards? And another key question, who is he inviting us to become? And then lastly, we put it together in terms of what are some postures and priorities that will enable us to walk towards God's invitation for us as a church. So as we probed through these questions and compiled a whole bunch of responses, we discovered a few things that kind of spoke to us, through our history of who we've been and where God's taken us. There's a number of things that you see here that came out of that. We're not going to spend a ton of time going through these. And then as we looked at where is God's presence, where do we see his fingerprints right now? Same thing. A number of responses came out, and we distilled them into some major themes here. And these themes came out in terms of where we see God's fingerprints now. What do we gravitate toward? What seem to be priorities that God's placed in our hearts? And we paid attention to these things. And then next, with the third question, we asked, what is God inviting us to reach towards? Who's he inviting us to become? And when we did this, it was very interesting that there were 3 strong themes that emerged in the responses as we were listening to God and one another. That there is an invitation for us to reach towards God together. Then there is an invitation, God was inviting us to reach out toward each other. And then there was God's invitation for us to reach out to the next ones, those who are new to us, those who are new to faith. So if these are God's invitations to us as a gathered people, the question arises then, how do we lean into what God is inviting us to? Now, usually what we do is we make plans to do things, to do stuff. It's like, okay, if this is what God's saying, let's do something about it. But before we jumped ahead too quickly, we asked a deeper question. And that question is, what kind of people is he encouraging us to be so that we are better able to reach towards him, towards others, and towards the next one? So the key question is, who is God inviting us to become? How is he inviting us to grow? What kind of posture do we need to cultivate among us so that we as the called out ones can actually work together towards these common threads that burn in all of our hearts? We need to become so that we can do. Because who we become is as important as what we do. Who we become is as important as what we do. 6 months ago, when we were talking about this, I mentioned an example of a church in New Zealand that we're connected with. And this particular church was going through a very similar process that we've gone through in terms of a lot of listening for the Lord, listening for his invitation. And one of the invitations for them was to reach out to their neighbors. But they found that they couldn't reach out to their neighbors. They're having roadblocks because within their church, they had a problem with forgiveness. They had a problem with forgiveness amongst one another, and even with how some things with the community have gone down. So in order to do, they had to become a forgiving people so that they could be people who could reach out into the next ones. Who we become is as important as what we do, because we need to become so that we can do. We believe that God values the formation of our hearts far more than any program that we can create. It all starts here before it goes out here. So the best plans that we can make are developed out of postures in terms of how we approach things. So as we met together and as we distilled all of these things that we'd been working on, we discovered some themes with postures and priorities in terms of this question, who is God seeking, who's God asking us to become? And these are some of the things that came out. God is calling us to become mentors and to have a mentorship mentality. As part of how we disciple people, we're mentoring one another. God is calling us to be an invitational people, inviting one another into relationship, inviting one another to growth opportunities, like Jessica did this morning with EHS, inviting one another into ministry opportunities, and to pray over one another. Very intentional invitations. Next, people who show up while still respecting our capacity as people. We believe that God is calling us to become a people who show up. We show up for one another. Next, God's calling us to become a people of increased hospitality. He's calling us to be people who are disciplined with spiritual habits and spiritual formation. God's calling us to be people who are confessional, authentic, honest, and good listeners. We believe He's calling us to be bold, to listen, hear, and to step out as He leads us. We believe He's calling us to be a healed people, to be rooted to the source, and to be a people of prayer. Now, this is the process that we engaged in June. And as we believe we heard from the Lord and we heard from one another, we set out to put these postures and these priorities into action and to live these things out that we believe that the Lord has called us to. And here is just a sample of some highlights of how we've engaged these priorities and journeyed this together. With regards to being rooted to the source, to being a people of prayer, to engaging spiritual habits, this summer, as God invited us to reach toward Him together, this summer we spent every Sunday engaging in spiritual practices and learning spiritual practices, reaching towards God by developing these spiritual habits. And also this summer, many of you engaged in the Well-Worn Path course that was by Dan Wilt that we offered here as well. And some of you did it individually, some of you got together in groups and you engaged it that way. And then also the emotionally healthy spirituality materials that we're launching here that not only lean into this stuff, but also lean into the healing posture that we believe God's calling us to. And then with kind of the mentoring, the hospitality, and the healing, what we've been doing in Sunday prayer groups at the end of our service where we gather together in groups has really been fostering this more and more, how we both show a lot of love and hospitality, but we also teach one another and we can become a point of healing for one another. And then different ways in which we have been showing up and that we have been engaging. And I'm just pleased that with the national fast that we just did with Vineyard Churches Canada, how many people from this church joined in that effort. It was absolutely amazing. And even just in general, more and more to more of the things that God is doing here, the life that is here, just more people are just showing up and getting their skin in the game. And it is beautiful. We're actually pushing into these things. Of course, we acknowledge the faithfulness of a number of other groups and activity that have long been operating in this area, but I just want to celebrate some of these highlights. Next, celebrating the highlights of how we've been reaching towards each other. There are many little things that we've been doing that are actually really big things that have been increasing. For example, the increased engagement during our coffee time where we're making a lot of new friends, developing and deepening relationships, and lots of good things coming out of that. And the many ways that we've been showing up to practically help one another, like some of the different moves that we've helped out, or preparing meals for people who've needed them, and just reaching out for people who've been lonely or down and reaching out to them. We've been seeing increased participation in various small groups. That's been wonderful. A lot of healing and mentoring going on there. The Emmanuel healing prayer training, really been leaning into that mentoring and healing, and then these new groups with the college and career, and then the emotionally healthy relationships course. Jeff and Melissa said yes to God's invitation to lead others in a process that's been highly impacting from them. And they actually pushed into this posture of invitation and actually invited many of you to participate in that group. And it was amazing. So many people showed up, and it had impact because we leaned into that posture of invitation. There's so many other good things that are going on here. But here are some highlights within this past year. And the last set of highlights here, as we reach out to the next ones, we've seen a lot more intentionality in forming relationships, both here and also out in our neighborhood. We've seen an increase of people just inviting one another and inviting people into our homes, inviting people to church, which has been amazing. Then we've also seen a lot of people show up and show a lot of hospitality when we've been doing things like partnering with the Tegler Youth Center in terms of the regular volunteering that's going on there, in terms of how we helped out with their Christmas dinner and with their gift giveaway that we hosted here. It was amazing to see how many harvesters really got their skin in the game when the neighborhood came here for that Christmas gift giveaway. That was amazing. And then, of course, things like our movie nights, our kids' clubs, and our heroes programs. All these things that I put up on the screen is just to show and to encourage you that these things that we believe we heard the Lord say and that we leaned into, these postures and these priorities, we've been pressing into them, and these postures that we've made a priority are bearing fruit. It's been good, and I really, really want to encourage you all. We're seeing good fruit come out of this. We heard the invitation of the Lord, and we said yes, and good things are coming. Now, as promised too, we're going to talk about some of the practicalities here really quickly about our church, and that's for everything that we do and everything that we've talked about, it all takes people for this to happen. And that's you, that's me. It's not somebody else, it's us. The ministry here at Harvest is significantly shaped by what God has placed in your heart and what you're willing to give your yes. So the only way we can do anything that Jesus has invited us to do is through the love and the effort that you're willing to invest. Because again, the church is people like you and me. Now we have a number of people you can see here who have taken up roles of leadership to help give some shape and order to what we do. And we have our board of directors, our elders team, the staff, and we have a couple of contractors who help us with the financials and so forth. And then we have all of our volunteers, which is pretty much all of you. This is what it takes. Within all of this, we have multiple layers of responsibility and accountability, but this is what it takes to see through the vision and the priorities. To do all that we do requires some leadership and some supporting structures to accomplish our purpose. And we are incredibly grateful to every single person who serves in every capacity to help us to journey well together. We're thankful for all the people who are serving in these capacities right now. I'm thankful for all of you in all of the different ways in which you get your skin in the game, in which you serve and participate in the things that we're doing. Now, everything that we do, our vision and priorities, also requires another practical support, and that's financial resource. So when it comes to finance and budget, we say that we are vision-driven. We discern the call and the direction for this church. We consider the values and the emphases that God places on our hearts, and then we find for ways to practically implement that. And generosity has provided practical resource that has enabled this church family to do all these things that God has called us to do together. Now, last year, when we did this, I went through our whole budget and I bored you all to death. But part of it is I did that in the sake of, in the spirit of transparency, and also just so everybody could really know and have a sense of confidence in terms of, when we do put in our resources together, what happens? What are we doing? Does our spending reflect our values? So if you are interested in the details, I have a couple of copies right up here, and we can talk about this after the service. I'm happy to go through this in detail with anyone who wants to. But for those of you who are just like, no, thank you for not boring me to death, we're just going to very quickly look at it. So there's the boring part, okay? Now you know why I'm having mercy on you. And so here, I just broken it down really quick here. Our budget has 4 main categories, which is staffing, general office expenses, our rent, general expenses like rent, utilities, cleaning, insurance, bank fees, accounting, phone, internet, that kind of stuff. Ministry expenses, supporting all the things that we do for in-house ministry activity, things that reflect our vision like kids, worship, healing, meals, books, things like that. Our outreach expenses, which supports the ministry outside of our walls, so all of our benevolence, all of our outreach, and then also within that comes, we give a portion of our income to Vineyard Canada to support the operation of our national family and all the ways that they support us. We also give to Compassion Canada, who we've been partnered with for many, many years, particularly with our mission work in Nicaragua. And then Pregnancy Care Center. Many of us are connected to that and the great work that they do in the city here. So part of that outreach goes to that. So the total that we have on our budget is $21,500 for the month. Now the question is, where does this resource come from? From you and me. We're it. Our tithes and our offerings given as an act of love and worship to the Lord support the ministry, the mission, the purpose to which we believe that God has called this church community. Where we have the heart in the vision, we invest. We invest and we trust that God will be faithful to provide and to bring the increase as he says. Jesus tells us that where your treasure is, there your heart is also. Where we invest our resources is also a statement of our hearts. It's a statement of our yes to God, a statement that we believe in him as provider and that we choose to seek his kingdom first and to trust that all these things, as he said, will be provided for us. In the context of generosity, the Apostle Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 9 that whoever sows generously will reap generously. And we have a long history in this church of experiencing God's faithfulness when we invest in his kingdom. Now, this morning, I really want to encourage you with what God is doing among us, with how he is speaking to us and how he is bringing fruitfulness to our yes to him. This church has a long 33-year history where we've seen God move powerfully and impact many, many lives. Year after year, we've seen God move because we've had people with open ears and open hearts who've been willing to respond in faith to his voice. That's how it happened. Open ears, open hearts, willing to respond to his voice. What can God do where there is faith? Not just move mountains, he can move people. So we join up his invitation with our faith. Now this June, we're looking at engaging in this listening process again to see where God might invite us for the next stage of the journey together. So in about another 6 months or so, we'll hear just a little bit about this again as we keep listening to the Lord in terms of, Lord, what are you calling us to go? What are you inviting us to reach for? Who are you inviting us to become? So we'll get that going on next June. But I want to invite you right now to open your ears and to listen for how the Lord might be inviting you to himself, inviting you to the call of his kingdom. Because in God's kingdom, everybody gets to play their part. That's the great thing about how God has it work. It's working. It's his gift to all of us. In God's kingdom, everybody gets to play their part. Everybody gets to join in on the adventure. So how might he be inviting you to participate in the growth and the movement of what he is doing and of what he is doing here among us as he's gathered us together? How might he be inviting you into engage in personal growth? Maybe it's time to take that next step, to grow in him, to learn something, to grow in your relationship, to solidify something. Maybe he's inviting you to help others to grow, to come alongside someone, to take their hand and to help them along the process. Or maybe he's inviting you to invest in our church family efforts and the different things that we do, with time, with resources, with love, with energy, in the ways that together we reach out to the community. Remembering the difference that we have made over all these years in following his call. Dream and imagine with me the difference that we could continue to make. It has been good. It will be good because God has been with us and God will be with us. Imagine the difference we could make. So wherever you joined in and for however long you've been riding this bus, God has been taking us on a journey. God continues to reach for us, and he continues to give us his yes in Jesus. And God invites us to continue on a life-giving adventure with him. He's given us his yes to us in Jesus, and he invites us to give our yes to him. So Harvest Vineyard, I invite you to say yes to what the Lord has for us, and let's journey together.